Okay, so Hillary Clinton's former campaign manager, John Podesta, is very unhappy about President Donald Trump's nominee for the new president of the World Bank. And Trump has been a regular critic of the World Bank, along with his nominee. David Malpass has also been a major critic of the World Bank. So I looked at this a couple of videos ago. You had some mainstream sources trying to make an issue out of this, people in the mainstream media that are clearly supporters of the World Bank, in contrast to many of my viewers, I'm sure, but they're trying to bring up a bunch of different issues. This has been going on for about over a week since the nomination was first made by President Trump. I did a video on this, so I won't fully recap, but just about a month ago, the former president of the World Bank that was nominated by President Barack Obama, Jim Yong Kim, was the former president of the World Bank. He was nominated by Barack Obama during his administration. Here he is with Obama, Jim Yong Kim, and Hillary Clinton in this picture. He resigned very abruptly. People said it was very abrupt resignation, and they were wondering why he left so suddenly. The excuse that he was giving, or the reason for leaving by the former World Bank president publicly, he was saying that he was departing for a position at a private equity fund. People were questioning the reason behind this. This was well before his term was supposed to be up, so people were thinking that maybe he was pushed out by President Trump, and the pick to replace him definitely adds to that theory, or would help support that theory. So John Podesta has been tweeting about this for last few hours. He's made 2 tweets, and he's linking to an article, both of them criticizing David Malpass, that he actually wrote in the Washington Post. John Podesta wrote 2 long rants that the Washington Post published for him. Here's the second tweet, also linking to the same article. John Podesta, from Hillary Clinton's campaign, says the World Bank needs a leader that believes in its mission. Trump's pick doesn't remotely clear that bar, according to John Podesta. We need a qualified leader at the helm of the World Bank. David Malpass, not that person, John Podesta is saying. The mainstream media has been going along with the same narrative. David Malpass, some of the things that he said about the World Bank, he's criticized their lending to China, and you have a handful of other media sources saying that Americans should be happy that the old president of the World Bank is being replaced, and that there will be more accountability for lending to China, for example. So they're saying, well, people should be happy about this pick, except maybe China, or if you're being funded by China, or so possible explanation as well for people being angry about this. They do mention that criticism specifically. Here they're saying Malpass has called for curbing the World Bank's financial reach and criticized its lending to China, one of the bank's recipients of aid. And I'm going to look at John Podesta's article about this too, and how it mirrors some other criticisms. Here's what Malpass said. So here's what another thing that Trump nominee for the World Bank has said, criticizing them. And one other issue that's coming along, it's interesting the timing of this. Now, this was from a ruling from the Supreme Court, but it does seem interesting as well. I looked at this article in the last video saying that the World Bank has just lost their legal immunity, opening doors for more lawsuits. This is another potential good sign. The World Bank, many of their so-called humanitarian projects, have really exploited the people that they're saying that they are trying to help, to the point where it's kind of a part of their ludicrous defense by the World Bank, saying, well, we shouldn't be subject to any sorts of lawsuits. It was a ridiculous sort of excuse that they came up with. They said the World Bank argued that the exclusion of the immunity of commercial activities did not apply to it. If it could be sued for its development loans, the bank maintained, it would become a target for lawsuits around the world that would cripple its ability to perform its core mission of fighting poverty and promoting development. So they're essentially admitting, well, our projects are so terrible. Yeah, we're saying that we're fighting poverty and promoting development, but these projects are so awful that we would be open to, we would be a target for lawsuits all around the world if you changed these rules. Basically, if you had to actually play by normal rules here. The Supreme Court didn't buy that excuse by the World Bank, saying those concerns are inflated. And now they're saying that this ruling does not extend to the IMF or the UN at this time. So those organizations, those are possible next steps. As of now, they do still have that immunity, but people were taking this as a promising sign that this decision has just been made. This is just about in the last week as well. So happening at the same time that the presidency of the World Bank is shifting over as well. You have those criticisms from Malpass about lending to China. He's also Trump's nominee to take over, has said that the World Bank is basically part of a host of organizations that are creating mountains of debt without solving problems. So the new nominee is saying World Bank adding to all this debt, they're not really solving any actual problems. He goes on, he says, huge organizations like the World Bank and the many multilateral development banks have created an environment where their own growth ends up being as important as their clients' growth. And then again, you have members of the establishment, people from the mainstream media, all kind of using similar talking points. Here's one person from the Council on Foreign Relations, Stuart Patrick, who is criticizing Trump and his pick to take over, saying, oh, they're going to dismantle the World Bank, as if this is some kind of terrible thing. A lot of people would like to see that, likely. But this person, of course, coming from the Council on Foreign Relations, let's look at his quote, and it's very similar to some of the things that John Podesta is saying in the Washington Post, of course. So this guy from the Council on Foreign Relations said, quote, he's criticizing Trump here. He's saying, it certainly seems like he's the wrong guy if you wanted to strengthen the World Bank, Patrick said. He has such a record of criticism of the World Bank, and he seems to have bought into the sovereignty mindset. I read this quote in the last video, and it's just such a weird way for him to phrase this criticism. It's a problem that countries want their own sovereignty. I mean, this is part of this whole issue, this whole shift here. But for people from the Council on Foreign Relations, you might think that they would worry about these things privately, but this is supposed to be an excuse that the public is supposed to be worried about this because they might have more sovereignty. That's a problem if the World Bank is dismantled. That seems to be what he's saying. He has such a record of criticism of the World Bank. He's not the person to lead it if you want to strengthen the World Bank. Seems to have bought into the sovereignty mindset of the administration, of the Trump administration, that global institutions are a threat. You have all these other media sources talking about, this is also from the Washington Post as well, saying the World Bank must reject Trump's nominee. Of course, the Washington Post hired Hillary Clinton's former campaign manager, John Podesta, to work for them. This was after all of the corruption, all these other things that were exposed in the Podesta leaks. After the Podesta leaks, Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post decides to hire John Podesta on as a contributor for the Washington Post. And of course, before people likely familiar with the history with Jeff Bezos and his purchase of the Washington Post. Before that, he received a $600 million contract with the CIA, a cloud computing contract. Jeff Bezos, who then went on to buy the Washington Post. So people have pointed out the connections to the CIA, that they are basically a mouthpiece for the CIA. They have people like John Podesta now contributing, being contributors for them, writing articles against Donald Trump, writing propaganda pieces written directly by John Podesta. Here's the article that he linked to on his Twitter page just a couple of days after. I just want to look at this headline. Washington Post has been posting these sorts of articles for a few weeks. They've really been trying to make a huge issue out of this new World Bank nominee. One headline from a few days ago saying America will, actually a couple of weeks ago, saying America will lose influence, not gain it, if Trump wins the fight over the World Bank presidency. That's from the Washington Post. And this is the article written by John Podesta. This is the one that was written late yesterday. He's still reposting it on his own Twitter page. Podesta keeps talking about David Malpass. And this is the article that he wrote from the Washington Post, is saying the World Bank must reject Trump's nominee to lead it. by John Podesta and Christina Costa, the co-authors of this article. So keep in mind, we're going to go through this info, but keep in mind, this is basically a hit piece, a propaganda piece against what Donald Trump is doing with the World Bank. This is coming from John Podesta. John Podesta, the chair of Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, served as counselor to President Barack Obama and chief of staff to President Bill Clinton. Christina Costa, who's co-written this article, works for the Center for American Progress and served in the Obama White House. Of course, the Center for American Progress is a think tank group, political organization that was founded by John Podesta. So it's an article basically written by John Podesta and one of his employees. They say, quote, they open, as a candidate and as president, Donald Trump has delighted in undermining tradition in damaging ways, from refusing to release his tax returns to lambasting America's NATO allies. But there's one tradition that deserves to be destroyed in the Trump era: the long-standing gentleman's agreement that the United States should choose the president of the World Bank, one of the most vital global institutions in the fight against extreme poverty. So John Podesta is saying that the U.S. should no longer be able to choose the pick because it's Trump's choice, and it's a huge issue for Podesta, apparently, saying the World Bank grew out of the post-war consensus that the global economy does not need to be a zero-sum proposition, and that achieving peace requires a commitment to shared prosperity. I brought up this article as well before, but it's just so similar to what Jacob Rothschild said fairly recently. People were looking at this article basically saying that Rothschild was worried about the New World Order. That is essentially what he's saying, but the actual specific language that he was using, and I just want to look at the one quick quote, because look at how similar this is to what John Podesta's trying to claim is such a huge issue, and mirroring this idea that people having their countries having their own sovereignty is somehow a problem as well. Jacob Rothschild recently said this about global financial systems, and this was having to do also with the sovereignty movements, these populist movements, the election of various nationalist governments, the rejection of globalist policies, institutions like the World Bank running other countries without them having any say, rejection of globalism, all these sorts of plans by the Rothschild and others. Jacob Rothschild was concerned about this, and he was basically threatening some kind of economic crash because he wasn't getting his way politically. I have looked at this quote, but he is basically framing this in the exact same terms as John Podesta. Here he said, quote, this was from Jacob Rothschild, in 9/11 and in the 2008 financial crisis, the powers of the world worked together with a common approach. Cooperation today is proving much more difficult. This puts at risk the post-war economic and security order. So that's an obvious reference to organizations like the World Bank. John Podesta and his co-author here make the same argument that Rothschild is making. Isn't it interesting that Rothschild, all these mainstream media sources, and now the Washington Post via John Podesta making the same argument, saying that the World Bank grew out of the post-war consensus, the post-war order. It's exactly what Jacob Rothschild said, post-war economic and security order. What's going on politically right now, they're saying, because we're not all going along with globalism, it's going to lead to some kind of economic big crash, is what Rothschild was threatening. Podesta saying almost exactly the same thing, and the World Bank is the next step in this trend that Podesta and Rothschild and Clinton and others do not like, clearly. It's going against the post-war consensus, Podesta says, back to the Washington Post Podesta article, that the global economy does not need to be a zero-sum proposition, and that achieving peace requires a commitment to shared prosperity. So cooperation, as Rothschild said, but it's really these globalist institutions all controlling individual governments, again, without the people having any kind of say. Podesta and Rothschilds think that this is a good thing. The rest of us obviously don't. Podesta does go on to say the United States has traditionally chosen the head of the World Bank, while European leaders have selected the director of its sibling organization, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. In that Supreme Court decision, that one article was pointing out that the IMF, possible next target to open up to lawsuits. A lot of people would like to see that as well, likely. Let's see the rest of this article. John Podesta going on saying, in 2012, for the first time, countries other than the U.S. put forward strong candidates to lead the World Bank. Also, because John Podesta likes other countries' picks for the World Bank this year more than Trump's pick, he says that we should change, I guess, all the rules around the nomination. The non-U.S. nominations were a long overdue recognition that regions that are often recipients of aid need not be subservient to traditional donor nations. Sort of ridiculous way for Podesta to try to frame this. He goes on saying, United States put forward a well-qualified candidate, Jim Yong Kim, that was Obama's pick, with a demonstrated commitment to global development, and the World Bank's directors selected him. They should feel no such obligation this time around. President Trump's candidate to run the World Bank, David Malpass, is unfit for the post. By the World Bank Group executive director's own publicly stated list of qualifications, Malpass is an undeserving candidate. The 25 executive directors wanted a candidate with a proven track record of leadership. What's going on? He's saying, rather than show a sense of humility for the wreckage of the recession, Malpass spent years urging the Federal Reserve to raise rates long before most experts thought the economy could handle such increases. In 2012, again, the Wall Street Journal, he predicted that another downturn would come the following year. The bank's executive directors additionally want a candidate with, quote, the ability to articulate a clear vision of the World Bank Group's development mission. So this is the real problem. Podesta's first trying to say that he's unqualified, but this is his real, Podesta's real problem with this is, again, that Malpass is pointing out the problems with the World Bank, and some people worrying that he's going to dismantle their work. They need a leader with a clear vision of the World Bank's group development mission, a firm commitment to and appreciation for multilateral cooperation. So he's not a globalist, basically, in very simple terms, or he's not to Podesta's standards, at least. Malpass, the Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Affairs, has articulated a vision that is diametrically opposed to the goals and tactics set out in the World Bank's own strategic planning documents. He has argued to cap the World Bank's size and limit the number of countries it can lend to. Again, a lot of us, probably a lot of viewers, a lot of the public probably thinks that these would all be good moves. Podesta is saying that this is all terrible because it's going to limit what the World Bank can do. It's going to limit their power. In congressional testimony last year, Malpass criticized the World Bank for its increasing emphasis on providing policy advice and coordination, in addition to traditional financial support, and alleged that the World Bank officials are often corrupt in their lending practices. John Podesta doesn't like that the new president has pointed out that the World Bank is corrupt in their lending practices. I guess nobody should be able to talk about that, according to Podesta. After his nomination became public last month, Malpass published an article in the Financial Times outlining what he would do as president of the World Bank. He's going along with Trump's party line: more power to the free market and less to governments and civil society organizations. Notably, he made no mention of the World Bank's decision in 2016 to put the UN's Sustainable Development Goals at the center of its strategic planning. The World Bank has taken seriously the need to incorporate climate risks into its investments and policy advice. The risks go unmentioned in Malpass's essay. So he's not going to use the World Bank as a tool, or he's not saying that he's going to use the World Bank to force all sorts of new climate policies. That's also an issue, according to Podesta, they close off here at the end of the article saying the position of World Bank president will be decided by a simple majority vote of its executive directors this spring after the window for nominations closes on March 14th. They say the field is narrowed to a short list of up to 3 candidates. Unlike at the UN Security Council, the United States has no veto. There will be other candidates for the position. The World Bank president, who will have global development experience, will have a constructive vision for how the bank can contribute to eradicating global poverty and will believe in strengthening multilateralism. The World Bank directors must reject David Malpass and empower developing nations to shape the future. So that's the line from John Podesta. Obviously not very happy with President Trump's pick. His nominee for the World Bank. We'll have to see what happens exactly if he is confirmed to take on that role. It's interesting just the level of not only Podesta, but other media sources, how much they're already freaking out over just the nomination alone. John Podesta, we'll see if he continues tweeting about this. He, a couple of tweets ago, said that he was basically sick of Twitter. He was going to, I guess, implying that maybe he was going to quit Twitter soon. John Podesta, of course, gets a lot of criticism every time that he makes any kind of tweet about anything. So you can go look at some of the comments underneath this yourself if you'd like to after. But we'll see if he continues on this subject or what. I'll continue to follow it as well. Obviously, we are going to be waiting. It will be the spring before we actually know for sure if Malpass is the next president of the World Bank. Let me know what you think. I do have a link to my Patreon account in the video description, patreon.com/realityreader. I also have a PayPal link. You can help the channel directly over at paypal.me/realityreader. Both links in the description. Let me know what you think, and I will follow up soon. Thank you.